Taxi!
Where to, mate?
Hello, mate. 55 Tufton Street, please.
55 Tufton Street, SW1. Yep, I know it well. Hop in, sir. This is A Nation of Taxpayers, a weekly podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance.
On this week's episode, we are joined by founder and director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Peter, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you, Duncan.
And from the Taxpayers Alliance, Will Yarwood, otherwise known as our favourite angry young man. Good to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks, Duncan. Great to see you, man.
Loads of stuff to go through here. Peter, we really want to focus this week on the whole area of culture, Western culture, our history, our heritage, why there seem to be an increasing number of people in this country who are ashamed of our past. But first off, before we look at some of that, and maybe we'll also get into Reform UK. You had a press conference earlier today and get your thoughts on that. But you set up the New Culture Forum back in 2006.
Yes.
So the catalyst, what was the reason behind that?
Well, it was largely because one sensed at that time, 20 years ago now, nearly, that basically free speech was already contracting, even then. And there was a sense too, we were in the middle of a time, for example, when radical Islam was very, very much in the news. We had just had 7/7, the bomb there, and various other incidents such as in the Netherlands, Theo van Gogh, and this was the kind of atmosphere in which it started, because you couldn't really talk frankly about these things even then, and of course the situation has got much worse in recent years. But it was also born out of the sense, it's a cliche now, Duncan, really, but at the time, I think it was Andrew Breitbart who said that basically politics is downstream of culture. I absolutely believed that and still believe that. I would say that we were a little bit, forward in our thinking in that sense. I mean, a lot of people were very, very sort of caught up in all the economic arguments. That went on for a long time. And it's still there, actually. I mean, you see it around here in Westminster where we're talking now. You sort of see still there's this emphasis, it's all about the economy. No. I mean, it's not. It's actually now about the survival or not of a way of life, actually. I would say it's that serious.
Give us your thoughts, Will, on where we find ourselves in 2025 when we talk about, as Peter says, our way of life. We talk about our culture, we talk about our history and heritage, where there seems to be on a daily basis people who are quite keen to rewrite history because they seem to be ashamed of it. You're a young and thrusting chap. How do you view it all?
Well, I feel a lot of it is quite depressing, naturally. I mean, I had a relatively good, actually, history education at school and actually did it myself at university and managed somehow to avoid all the postmodernist and, cultural Marxist stuff at university. And actually we were told at university that postmodernism effectively isn't good history because postmodernism doesn't rely on facts. It doesn't believe in facts at all. It sort of interprets a Nietzsche quote that there are no facts, there are only interpretations, and then uses that as the basis for a lot of its ideology. And luckily in history, facts matter, evidence matters. We have to have primary sources and things like that. But I look back at my university sometimes, I see some of the courses they're peddling in our history departments now, and virtually none of it is to do with the Victorian era, English Civil War, just basic European history. A lot of it is to do with international history, third world countries. It's to do with colonialism, but not from like a sort of balanced point of view. They consistently talk about, the cultures and the countries that, you don't discuss all that much anymore. But then when the entirety of your history courses are just that, it's like, okay, how on earth is a young person going to university studying history, learning anything about their own country? I mean, I know at secondary school as well now, the way in which the history curriculum has changed has been quite radical in the sense that although I had a good one and actually did learn things like the English Civil War and the Industrial Revolution at school, which I was very lucky to do. Now a lot of it is to do with like American civil rights movements. A lot of it is to do with the Atlantic slave trade. A lot of it is to do with stuff sort of just, instilling some level of guilt in the students that you're teaching in order so that they come out the other side thinking, my country's not very good, we've committed crimes or atrocities or whatever it might be, and therefore I have no reason to defend this country in the way that it is, which is why they then adopt policies like, hyper-liberal mass immigration, hyper-liberal social policies, and so on and so forth. And even though I'm a very right-wing young man, I do see that amongst a lot of my friends, and I think it's only now, and I'm sure Peter's seeing this, only now where there's quite a few sort of younger people, what we call Generation Z, which are now sort of pushing against that in quite a vigorous way. So there is a little bit of hope, but generally from the history education point of view, a lot of it is quite depressing, and obviously all of it's being taxpayer funded. So
yeah, absolutely that. Let's talk about academia, Peter. I mean, how did it go wrong so quickly?
Well, it's always been more on the left. I mean, I
it seems worse now.
No question. I think when I was at university, I was at what was considered to be a very left-wing university, University of Kent, and that was in 79 to 82, right? So it had its sit-ins and it had all of this, and it was very radical, but in a kind of almost quaint way now when you look at what people are dealing with now. The amount of academics who identified as being conservative was much higher then, much higher. Not a majority, but higher. I think now it's at an all-time low. I think that, frankly, I wouldn't even advise anyone to go to university anymore. No. I just wouldn't. I mean, I have young people around or the sons, daughters of friends. They say, what should I do? And I would say, unless it is, well, even then, that's a bit of a doubt. But unless it's a top sort of, university with a very, very good degree course or whatever, basically, I would say don't bother. Because the way that it is now, and you've already alluded to it, well, is that young people, and I'd say especially young men actually, their lives are going to be unpleasant in university institutions, and indeed, for that matter, in the corporations that they might go and work in. They will be implicitly blamed for most bad things. I don't mean to do with the work in hand. No. I mean generally as white males, whatever. Best thing you can do is to plough your own furrow as much as you can. I would say get your own business going. I don't know, something like that. Yeah. But avoid what will be an unpleasant experience for which you will pay a great deal of money. I mean, I was sort of not the last, but one of the last generations that was paid for university, grant. Yeah. But it was sort of what you would call means tested. It was half, went through. I look back actually at that time and actually think, well, probably there was something to be said for that actually. But the kind of real fundamentalists at the time were very pro, student loans. But I think the way it's worked out, we've got universities now who are not even worthy of the name. Many of them are now just looking entirely at the bottom line, and that's it. Yeah. And then people coming out with stuff with degrees which are not going to help them. They've been completely betrayed in that sense.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the Blair era, isn't it? Yes. This mantra, which is like everyone should go to university. I never went. I just started as a journalist, working at, doing stuff for local newspapers and built it up that way. Yeah. But there was certainly, I was certainly aware from 97 onwards, this whole mantra that everyone should just go to university. Yeah. And of course, then that's an opportunity. Should you want to carry out some social engineering, you've got all of those people in the right place, haven't you? Just moving on a little bit from academia, what are your thoughts, Peter, on where we're at? No, that's not the right question. Of how culpable the media is in all of this. Because, I work for the BBC. I was completely at odds with the organisation. It's just, there is definitely a mindset that is certainly within the London version of the BBC, slightly different in places like Newcastle, where it's a different mindset. But there is definitely in the DNA of what I call the London BBC. There's certainly a mindset, and a lot of airtime given over to certain causes or viewpoints that actually show this country in a really poor light. What's your take on where the media is at with it all?
Well, I think the media is in fact one of the most culpable in this. When you say where is it at with it all, I assume you mean the kind of cultural revolution
I do mean that
this country's been through.
Yeah, and rolling into the BBC, I'd say Channel 4 as well.
Yeah.
LBC Radio, which now appears to not be a massive fan of this country. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
Yes. Well, like you, I worked at the BBC. Yeah. I started my production career actually at an arts program called Omnibus, which was back in the 90s. And then
he won't remember that because he's too young. I remember Omnibus. Yeah.
But I started there, but then I was mostly at the South Bank show in ITV. But also I was on the BBC a lot. In fact, it was very interesting to point and just a little story anecdote. When I used to do Newsnight Review, it was an arts program, and they heard about the New Culture Forum early on, so I was on it quite a few times. But they tried to introduce me as Peter Whittle from the right-leaning New Culture Forum. You must. Actually, I didn't mind. But if only they had said that the other guests were left-leaning or were centre-leaning. But no. There was this quite almost unconscious belief that these were the civilised beliefs, and that our belief therefore was basically a niche one, or indeed a sort of a naughty but nice one,
or even a controversial one.
Yeah. But I think that the BBC, we have it in for. I used to. I grew up with the BBC. I used to watch the usual thing. Used to watch the BBC. Anything I felt for it has completely disappeared now. I think that the cultural damage it's done far outweighs any benefit. And also the fact is we concentrate on the BBC because, of course, we pay for it in the licence fee. But pretty much most of the media follows the BBC line. Sky, what's happened at Sky News is extraordinary. Sky used to be kind of a upstart. Now it's sort of like it's even lefter than Channel 4, I think, in many respects. And I don't watch any of it anymore. I don't have a TV. I got rid of it. I think it was during COVID. I don't want to be told. I don't want to be made angry. And actually, for that matter, this was not actually necessarily a news issue. The worst kind of bias now happens in all the other programs it produces, the dramas, the comedy, all of these areas. You are being, lectured. That you are being told something that and you deny it at your peril. That's the feeling you get with the BBC. And I think, in answer to your question, I think that when it comes to all the areas that we might worry about, that we talk about at the New Culture Forum, I'm sure that you do at the TPA too, the media is this huge kind of barrier, I believe, to getting the message out to the majority of people. That is why these sorts of things that we're doing like now, today, and indeed that we've been doing at the NCF are so important. They've never been so important. You are not going to get the people on ITV or BBC Local or whatever it might be, or Channel 4, talking about certain issues, and even if they do, they will talk about them in a certain framework.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and because they're scared, essentially they're scared, and that goes hand in hand with their belief system and their mindset. And you're absolutely right. Podcasts, YouTube. If you're an organisation, if you're a think tank, if you're a pressure group, it is great. It's never been easier to create your own media, which means you have the platforms there, the worldwide platforms. You can get your message out. It's a challenge to get cut through sometimes. But my God, thank goodness we do have this technology available in order to have these conversations What are your thoughts, Will?
Well, also the traditional media institutions know that, actually. Like, various traditional media institutions have had cutbacks. They focused very heavily on social media, on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Facebook. Because, of course, if you look at simple Ofcom statistics, I think it's 65% of all people in the UK consume media on their smartphones via social media. It's not from, like, the traditional apps or from print newspapers that you go down the shop and buy, as, my gramps used to do with the Telegraph, but even if he doesn't do that anymore, he just looks at things on his iPad, right? Even the older generations now, from what I've seen, are moving away from traditional media, not just also because it's expensive to go out and buy a newspaper, but also, why would you bother doing that when you can just type in something to Google and get everything you want within 2 seconds and more information that you could possibly need? But yeah, it has never been easier, but also it provides a very unique and interesting opportunity whereby you don't have the same kind of institutional censorship that traditional media organisations would like to impose on you, but there is also a slight sort of thrilling danger to it, where you can see individuals and groups on social media getting way more hits and way more views and way more attention than a piece in a traditional media publication or a hit on a broadcast studio. So it proves a lot of the sort of people who, and I include myself in this slightly because obviously I'm a digital person, but it proves a lot of us people right that actually this was the future, and if you don't jump on it, you're going to miss the train, and actually you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, Peter, how do we? I get really angry when I see talking heads on the telly, on the radio, or whatever, really criticising this country and its past, criticising our culture. I get really angry about it. I don't see enough people going into bat for our country or culture. I think a lot of mainstream politicians are quite scared to do that as well, because there might be a backlash. Going forward, how do we protect Western culture? What can we do?
Very, very big question, but I think the vital question, actually. I think that's what's at stake. Our country and also our civilization. You talk about people who you see on TV or on the radio. I have great belief and faith in the wisdom of crowds, and I think that most people do not feel that dislike and that contempt. They've been cowed and battered into submission, but in fact those views are of a piece with all the different lobbies we've seen over the past, especially the past 5 years, whether it's BLM, whether it's the trans movement, which I think is also part of this, all of these different areas, the eco movement, all of them are attacking in some shape or form the foundations of what we are. And so basically the mistake, I think, is that a lot of people take them at their own word and say, well, if you want people to listen to like BLM, or if you want people to listen to eco-warriors or trans activists, maybe they're going about it the wrong way. They're alienating people. They don't quite understand. They don't care about alienating people. No. The whole point is that they want to destabilize the very foundations of what we are. And they're being very successful, right? So, for example, this is a nice circular with what we were talking about earlier, is that I think even 10, 20 years ago, I think it was something like 70% of young people were had pride in Britain, British history. That's now down to 40%. So, in other words, the work has been very successful, during that time. If you've had, in answer to your question, if you have had what amounts to a revolution through all of your institutions, something which when we started, by the way, and we used to talk, it's hardly a conspiracy theory when you talk about Gramsci. And the Frankfurt School, it's not exactly, it was a particular theory put forward that you should actually hollow out a society from the inside by going into its institutions. And basically, now everyone, you don't hear anything but that. I mean, people talk all the time about the hollowing out of British society and how it's happened. So basically, you've got to have a counter-revolution. You are going to have to sweep away whole parts, if not all, of the establishment and the way in which we have actually done things up until now. Because all the institutions are there in the same, and so are the buildings. It's just that the people in them are entirely different, and they are antipathetic to our best, our health and to our fortune. They, they have not got our best interests at heart.
So is it too late?
No, it's not too late. It is getting a bit hairy, but it's not too late, because otherwise, I would say it's not too late for a number of reasons. Some of which might seem rather small, right? But I was very involved when I was in UKIP with the Brexit campaign, as on the front bench of UKIP as it then was. You were still considered a bit of a nutcase in 2010 if you thought we would leave the EU. Now, for a minute, just forget about what's gone wrong since, right? I'm talking about the principle of the thing. And here we were in 2016, and a majority of people voted for it. In other words, it can change from being a very small concern to actually being something that actually guides the nation. Also, I see younger people who've never known anything but the situation we're talking about. We've got something to compare it to. Sorry, I don't mean to be condescending, but we've got something to compare.
He is our angry young man.
Right, right, okay. But I know people, very, very high quality, articulate people, and who have a very strong sense of love for the country, but also an intellectual underpinning. And I think that gives me enormous hope for the future. But there's no getting away from it. I think before that, I was just discussing it at a business lunch, actually. Before that, we are going to face such a terrible situation in this country, actually. And I feel that it's almost tangible now. I think that all the arguments about woke and about all of those things, they're going to kind of diminish slightly and go into the background, because I think the social breakdown is something now that we are actually facing. And I think that people actually can feel this, even if you're just going by social media. They feel something has sort of tangibly changed in the past even few months. Tell me if you feel this, or whether you think I'm being sort of super sensitive. I certainly do. A sort of sense of dislocation, and also just a change in their surroundings, mostly demographic, of course. The level of betrayal that this country has endured over the past 10 years is quite unspeakable. The biggest betrayal for me was indeed Boris Johnson and what he did, for example, with what's now being called the Boris wave. I think that, if all the problems that pretty much we talk about sort of started, or at least were turbocharged around the time of Blair and 1997, nothing compares really to what Johnson did, while saying he was doing the opposite. How any Tory, if anyone even takes them seriously now, how any Tory can honestly argue that we need Boris back, like they're saying at the moment, I find unbelievable.
Well, totally. they're desperate, aren't they? And I think they're scratching around looking for a solution. And I think we can agree that Boris Johnson certainly is not that solution. What you've nicely done there, Peter, is moved us on a little bit to where we find ourselves today. We're recording this on a Tuesday afternoon. The podcast gets released in about 48 hours' time. And we had a press conference here in Westminster this morning with Nigel Farage and various Reform UK representatives. So let's spend a few moments talking about that, because you will know Farage from your time at UKIP, so you've got some skin in the game here. Will, you watched the press conference this morning.
I did.
I've got some observations, but what did you make of it? And just outline some of the things that were announced.
Yeah, sure. So the main thing really was Farage was coming on basically as his first proper address since Reform won quite extensively in the May local elections. And it wasn't really a sort of boasting or bragging parade, but Farage just came out and said, we are now the party of working people, Labour, your time is numbered. Because that was the big thing for Nigel post winning in July last year was, the Tories, forget about them, they're not relevant anymore, we're now coming after the Labour Party. And that's been shown to be true, because large areas of the country which traditionally voted Labour have now swung over to the Reform Party in quite a heavy way. And Reform have started to sort of trinkle out a few policies. So, for example, policies which I actually couldn't foresee UKIP or even the Brexit Party announcing. Now Reform are advocating for things like nationalising steel, which we knew already, but the new one is to do with scrapping the two-child benefit cap, which is not something that I'd expect Nigel Farage, who has always been a relatively committed Thatcherite, at least in his economic sense, would be committing to. Now, I mean, I disagree with it naturally. Actually, I wouldn't from the Taxpayers Alliance, but my main concern whenever someone announces a spending policy, my answer is, okay, great. How are you going to pay for it?
Exactly.
And the problem I'm seeing with reform at the moment, and this actually wasn't the same for UKIP back in 2015. I mean, we had the now late great Patrick Flynn in just a few weeks ago to talk about this kind of stuff. And the UKIP 2015 platform was very coherent, had policies for everything. Everything was fully costed. It was brilliant. But now it seems reform are just sort of saying, oh, we'll do this and we'll figure it out later, which is not a way to do politics. And also, when they're going to now they've got actual power, they're now going to be scrutinised even more, and people are going to ask, okay, where is this money going to come from? And it's all very good saying, oh, we're going to get rid of foreign aid, or we're going to decrease the number of quangos, and all stuff I'm wholeheartedly in favour of. But the difference is, I know the numbers on that kind of stuff, and I know actually when you're trying to fund certain policies, even getting rid of some of that stuff is not going to deal with the absolute economic state of this country, and nor going to fund the policies that you want to fund. So I just want some... and I understand culture and vibes are important, and I do agree with Peter that there has been a shift, and I felt it myself. But I want reform to follow that shift with some recognition that, you're on 30% now. You're not small kids anymore. You need a proper policy in place, and if you don't, if you do get into power, there's a likelihood that you might mess it up.
And I don't think it's unreasonable for the electorate to want to see what I was saying on the media over the weekend. Show me your workings out. Yeah. Which is a phrase from my school days. You can say this, but show me how you got to this. And there is a danger, and I've seen it in the last few hours with various reform people on the media, where they just go, oh, well, I'm going to scrap that zero. I'm going to get rid of the quangos. It's a catch-all answer for everything. And actually, people want some numbers. So they can go, actually, I might chuck my vote behind you because you do appear to be economically sound and literate. My observation about what I saw today was I was staggered not to see all of the MPs on stage. We had Sarah Pochen, the new Runcorn MP, which was great because she won earlier this month on the 1st of May. Yeah. But it would have been nice to have seen Richard Tice there and Lee Anderson and James McMurdoch. I mean, maybe they're on holiday because it's in recess, but you would have thought it's an opportunity to get more media time and show that you're a very cohesive fighting unit. I've done enough waffling. Peter, what your sense on where reform's going? Will they form the next government, do you think?
It might seem extraordinary to say, but there's a real chance.
Yeah.
I think that the most important thing, in a way, for reform is that if they get 100 seats, say, not forming the next government, but 100 seats, out of a standing start, effectively, that will be remarkable. Yeah. And I think that the psychological effect that will have generally on politics will be enormous because, for a long time, I've certainly, for example, believed in and supported proportional representation. Yeah. I think actually Nigel Farage has too.
Well, yes, they have up until recently. Yes. There seems to be all of a sudden a little bit of a kind of maybe first past the post
actually,
isn't so
therefore,
bad.
Therefore, it's all the more of an achievement, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's all the more of an achievement. And who knows how that could open up the field to other parties and all of that. I think that, there's this terrible phrase that goes around, critical friend of, but I've actually always been friendly to reform. I have criticised, I think sometimes their lack of radicalism. I think that they are sometimes worrying about offending the wrong people. If that is what it is. So, I mean, on issues such as Islam or indeed immigration, I would be far more radical on immigration. I don't like the current policy that they have on, net zero migration, one in, one out. I think that they should change that. In fact, maybe, who knows, they will. Where I don't have so much of a sort of sense of this, you've got to give us numbers and all of that, is simply that it is 4 years away.
Yes.
We're talking rather as though we're going to the polls, next month, and that you still are not producing figures. A lot of this is actually to set, if you like, the mood.
Yes.
And I think with where Reform are right is that if you look at all polling, and this is true of UKIP, a lot of people thought that UKIP was kind of like a real kind of hardline right-wing thing. It actually wasn't. On cultural issues, great patriotism, not for empire, by the way, much more the Second World War, actually, as it was, not really empire. All of those things, immigration, all of those things, very, very strong on that. When it came to economics, there was always a strong leftist. I mean, even Patrick ended up in the SDP, didn't he?
Yeah. I was reading, and we did a little tribute on last week's episode to Patrick O'Flynn.
Yes.
But he came out with this policy that put him at odds with Farage of a WAG tax. Do you remember that? Well, of course you remember that.
It was at Doncaster in 2015, I think.
This idea of putting a levy on handbags and very expensive shoes, which at the time Nigel Farage, I think that particular policy lasted 24 hours, 36 hours.
If that, I think he said something like, not on my watch.
Yeah, exactly. As you rightly say, Patrick ended up joining the SDP.
But there is, if I could just say, Duncan,
please do.
there is sort of like, if you're looking at the Red Wall, and I've got quite a bit of this in me. I mean, I, for example, have had one or two run-ins with the likes of the Institute for Economic Affairs when it comes to things such as like immigration and all of that, where they seem to sort of just think it's all about the bottom line, that a country is like a balance sheet. And I have no time for that argument at all. One of the best things Nigel, I think, ever said, Nigel Farage, when we were still in UKIP, I think, was he said, I would be happy for us to lose a few points on GDP if it meant that we were still a cohesive society, right? That, in a way, is in a kind of amalgam of what you're talking about now. Slightly left on economics, but certainly not on cultural issues.
So interesting. I'm looking at the clock. I don't know where this 30 minutes has gone.
It's disappeared into thin
flown
air.
by. It's been an absolute joy. Would you come back on a future episode?
Oh, absolutely.
Peter? Very kind of you. And
pleasure.
if people want to find out more about the new Culture Forum, I mean, obviously you can Google it and the website will come up. Anything you want to mention?
Website, and then obviously with Twitter, it's either at New Culture Forum, or it's at PR Whittle, if you want.
Yes,
I
brilliant.
think. Twitter. X. Sorry.
X, yes, formerly known as Twitter. Do the liking and the following. Peter, thank you for joining us
It's a pleasure.
on this episode. And Will, as always, thank you.
Thanks, Duncan.
Always a pleasure to have you here. This is the podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance. It's called A Nation of Taxpayers. You find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, also on YouTube. Please like us and follow us. That is always good. And if you want to spread the word about this podcast, please share it with your friends, family, enemies, the usual suspects. And you can always send us an email if you'd like to. Anything you want to pick up on, maybe suggest a future guest. The email address is podcast@taxpayersalliance.com.